The sirens started at 3:12 inches in the morning. Not the familiar wail that Israelis have lived with for decades, the rhythmic rising and falling tone that sends families to shelters and children under stairwells while Iron Dome batteries intercept the incoming and the all-clear sounds within minutes. This was different. This was every siren in Tel Aviv, in Haifa, in Beersheba, in Jerusalem, firing simultaneously and not stopping. A wall of sound that merged into a single unbroken scream across the entire length of Israel's populated corridor. The radar operators at the Palmachim Air Base Detection Center saw it first, a return so large, so dense, so geometrically impossible that the senior watch officer initially assumed a software malfunction. He called for a system restart. The technician next to him grabbed his arm and pointed at the raw feed, the unfiltered signal, before any processing algorithm touched it. What they were looking at was not an error. It was 5,000 individual hypersonic signatures traveling at Mach 5.4, launched in staggered waves from Iranian territory, from forward positions in Iraq and Syria, and from a fleet of Turkish-manufactured mobile launch platforms that had repositioned across the region over the preceding 72 hours. 5,000 Tayfun block, 4 hypersonic ballistic missiles, all targeting the same geographic corridor, all converging on Tel Aviv's military command infrastructure within a 19-minute window. The watch officer did not restart the system. He picked up the direct line to the Chief of General Staff's emergency bunker and said 4 words: "We cannot stop this." What you are about to hear is not speculation. It is the logical endpoint of a strategic trajectory that has been building for years, a convergence of Iranian determination, Turkish weapons technology, and American strategic paralysis that has fundamentally rewritten the rules of war in the Middle East. This channel exists to give you the analysis that mainstream media is either unwilling or unable to provide. If you are watching for the first time, subscribe now and turn on notifications. The events unfolding in real time demand the kind of depth and honesty that we deliver every single episode. Stay with us for the full breakdown. This is the story that changes everything. 4 questions are burning through every intelligence agency, every war room, and every foreign ministry on the planet right now. First, how did Iran acquire 5,000 Tayfun block, 4 hypersonic missiles from Turkey, a NATO member state, without triggering the alliance's collective security apparatus? Was this a covert transfer conducted over months of careful concealment, or is something far more dramatic happening inside NATO itself, a fracture so deep that one of its largest military members has effectively switched sides in the defining conflict of the 21st century? Second, the Iron Dome, the David Sling, the Arrow 2, the Arrow 3. Israel's entire layered air defense architecture was built and funded with American money, American technology, and American strategic guarantees. Tonight, that architecture intercepted a fraction of the incoming and then went silent. Was the system simply overwhelmed by volume? Or did the Tayfun block, 4's hypersonic terminal maneuvering, defeat the engagement algorithms in ways that even the engineers who designed those algorithms did not anticipate? Third, the United States 6th Fleet is in the Mediterranean. The 5th Fleet is in the Persian Gulf. American Aegis destroyers with SM-3 interceptors were within engagement range of portions of this missile salvo. They did not fire. Not a single American interceptor was launched. Why? Is this a failure of political will, a failure of command authority, or is it the public revelation of a private American decision that has already been made at the cost of direct confrontation with Iran? Turkey, Russia, and China simultaneously is a cost that Washington has decided it cannot pay. Fourth, Turkey is a NATO member with Article 5 obligations. Iran is the alliance's designated adversary in the region. If Turkey has provided Iran with the weapons that just destroyed Israel's military command infrastructure, what does NATO actually mean anymore? And what does the American security guarantee extended not just to Israel, but to every ally from Warsaw to Tokyo actually mean when the moment of reckoning arrives? Let's go deep. To understand what 5,000 hypersonic missiles means in operational terms, you need to discard every previous mental model you have of missile warfare. Every previous large-scale missile attack in history, including Iran's own previous strikes against Israel, was designed around the logic of saturation. Fire enough missiles that the defense cannot intercept all of them and accept that the majority will be shot down while a meaningful minority gets through. Tonight's attack was not designed around that logic. It was designed around a completely different principle, the principle of absolute geometric impossibility. There is no air defense system on Earth, not the American Patriot, not the Russian S-500, not Israel's own Arrow network, that can physically engage 5,000 hypersonic targets converging on a single geographic area within a 19-minute window. The mathematics do not permit it. Each engagement cycle for a hypersonic target requires approximately 45 seconds of radar track, targeting solution, computation, interceptor launch, and terminal guidance. Even if every battery in Israel's entire defense network fired continuously at maximum theoretical rate, the total engagement capacity within 19 minutes is a fraction of 5,000. Iran and its Turkish-supplied arsenal did not try to defeat Israel's air defenses. They rendered them mathematically irrelevant. The Tayfun Block 4, unveiled by Rocketsan at IDEF 2025, travels at Mach 5.4 inches its terminal phase. At that velocity, from a launch point in western Iran, the flight time to Tel Aviv is approximately 11 minutes. The missile executes a maneuvering, re-entry, changing azimuth and elevation in the final 30 kilometers of flight in a pattern that is computationally unpredictable without advanced knowledge of the guidance algorithm. Arrow 3, Israel's highest tier interceptor designed specifically for exo-atmospheric interception of ballistic missiles, was engineered against a threat traveling in a predictable ballistic arc. The Tayfun Block 4 does not travel in a predictable ballistic arc. In its terminal phase, it behaves more like a maneuvering aircraft than a ballistic missile, except it is traveling at speeds no aircraft has ever achieved. The first wave of 800 missiles launched from Iranian territory. They rose to an apogee of approximately 140 kilometers, briefly touching the edge of space before beginning their terminal descent at Mach 5.4. Israel's Arrow, 3 batteries engaged. They achieved an intercept rate that the Israeli Defense Ministry has not officially confirmed, but that multiple independent analysts examining the post-strike damage pattern estimate at between 12 and 18% of 800 missiles in the first wave. Somewhere between 650 and 700 reached their intended targets. Before the intercept cycle from the first wave was complete, the second wave launched 900 missiles, this time from forward positions in Iraq and Syria, with a shorter flight time and a flatter trajectory that forced David Sling, the mid-tier interceptor, into its engagement envelope before Arrow 3 batteries had reloaded. David Sling achieved a higher intercept rate against this wave. The flatter trajectory is more predictable, but was overwhelmed by volume before the wave was half engaged. The third, fourth, and fifth waves followed at 4-minute intervals, each calibrated to a different azimuth, altitude profile, and terminal maneuvering pattern. By the time the third wave arrived, Israel's ground-based radar network was degraded. The electromagnetic environment over central Israel had been saturated by the electronic warfare packages integrated into the first 2 waves' missile bodies, a passive jamming system that broadcasts noise across the frequency. Bands used by Israel's fire control radars, Iron Dome batteries, which operate in the lower tier against shorter range threats, found their targeting systems partially blinded. The Tel Aviv command complex, the Kiryat, absorbed impacts from the second wave onward. The primary command building, the underground war room, the signals intelligence facility, the communications hub that connects IDF headquarters to every field unit and every political leader in the country, all of it was struck repeatedly. Not once, not twice, but in successive waves that prevented damage assessment, prevented emergency repairs, prevented evacuation of personnel still inside when the next wave arrived. By the end of the 19th minute, when the last Tayfun block, 4 of the 5th wave, impacted, the Kiryat complex had ceased to exist as a functional military headquarters. The underground war room, reinforced to withstand conventional bunker-busting munitions, had been penetrated by the cumulative kinetic energy of multiple hypersonic impacts on the same structural sections, a phenomenon that the original designers had not modeled because no one had previously contemplated an attacker capable of placing multiple hypersonic warheads within meters of each other on a hardened underground target. The IDF's command chain was not damaged, it was erased. The Tayfun Block 4 is the most consequential weapons development of the past decade, and almost nobody in the Western public sphere was paying attention when it was unveiled. Roketsan, Turkey's state-owned missile manufacturer, presented the Tayfun Block 4 at the International Defense Industry Fair in Istanbul in July 2025. The official presentation described it as Turkey's first hypersonic ballistic missile capable of exceeding Mach 5 and striking targets at ranges exceeding 800 kilometers. The unofficial assessments from analysts who examined the technical specifications and details suggested the range figure was conservative, that the actual maximum range, depending on payload, was closer to 1,200 kilometers. The key innovation in the Block 4 variant is the terminal guidance system. Earlier Tayfun variants, the weapon began development as a conventional ballistic missile, used inertial navigation with GPS correction in the terminal phase. The Block 4 replaced this with a combined system, inertial navigation, satellite correction, using Turkey's own Göktürk constellation rather than American GPS, and an imaging infrared seeker in the final 15 kilometers that allows the missile to identify and precisely target specific structures rather than simply impacting a set of coordinates. This matters enormously for what happened tonight. A missile that hits a set of coordinates might destroy a building. A missile that identifies a specific structure using infrared imaging and steers itself toward it in the terminal phase destroys that specific structure regardless of small coordinate errors. The difference between area effect and precision effect in hypersonic velocity is the difference between a weapon that damages a military headquarters and a weapon that specifically targets the underground war room, the communications hub, and the power infrastructure in that order in successive waves. Iran received the Tayfun Block 4 through a transfer that Western intelligence is still working to fully reconstruct. The public record shows that Turkey and Iran have maintained a complex, often contradictory relationship, simultaneously adversarial in Syria, where their proxies have fought each other and economically intertwined, with Turkey serving as a critical conduit for Iranian trade during periods of heavy Western sanctions. What is now apparent is that beneath this public complexity, a strategic level understanding was reached, one that involved Turkey providing Iran with its most advanced missile technology in exchange for considerations that have not yet been fully disclosed, but that almost certainly include Iranian energy commitments, access to regional influence networks, and a tacit understanding about spheres of influence in a post-American Middle East. The scale of the transfer is staggering. 5,000 Tayfun Block. 4 missiles represent a quantity that exceeds Turkey's own declared inventory. This means one of two things. Either Turkey transferred missiles from its own operational stockpile, a decision of extraordinary strategic significance, or the transfer involved Roketsan production capacity with missiles manufactured specifically for Iranian use over a period of months or years. The latter scenario implies that the Turkish government, at the highest levels, made a deliberate decision to weaponize Iran at a scale sufficient to fundamentally alter the regional military balance. Either scenario represents a rupture in the NATO alliance that has no historical precedent. Turkey has been a NATO member since 1952. Its military is the alliance's second largest. It controls the Bosphorus Strait, through which Russian naval vessels must pass to reach the Mediterranean. The implications of a Turkey that has effectively aligned itself with the Iran-Russia-China strategic bloc rather than the Western alliance structure are almost too large to process in real time. But the weapons dimension goes further than the Tayfun block. For alone, the electronic warfare packages integrated into the missile bodies were not developed by Roketsan. They bear the signature of Aselsan, Turkey's defense electronics giant, specifically the jamming architecture developed for the Turkish Air Force's electronic attack programs. Aselsan's involvement means that the jamming capability deployed against Israel's fire control radars tonight was not improvised. It was engineered, tested, and integrated into a coherent electronic warfare doctrine designed specifically to suppress the frequency bands used by Arrow and David's Sling engagement radars. This is not a country selling weapons to another country. This is a country providing a complete weapons system missile, guidance, electronic warfare, targeting data integrated into a coherent operational doctrine designed to defeat a specific adversary's defense network. That is a level of military cooperation that has only one name: alliance. Turkey and Iran are in an alliance. The evidence is the smoking ruin of the Kiria complex. The word horror in tonight's headline is not rhetorical. The reaction in Washington over the past several hours has been described by multiple sources with access to the Situation Room as genuinely horrified, not the managed, performative concern of a government navigating a difficult ally's problems, but the raw, visceral recognition that something has gone catastrophically, irreversibly wrong in a way that no plan, no doctrine, and no presidential speech can fix. Let us be precise about what American forces could have done and chose not to do. The USS Carney, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer operating in the Eastern Mediterranean, had targeting solutions on portions of the Tayfun block 4 salvo within its engagement envelope. The SM-3 Block IIA interceptor, which the Carney carries, was specifically designed for the exo-atmospheric interception of ballistic and hypersonic threats. Against the first wave of 800 missiles, the Carney could have engaged targets in the mid-course phase before the terminal maneuvering began with a theoretical intercept probability significantly higher than the Arrow 3 achieved in the terminal phase. The order to engage did not come. The Carney's captain requested engagement authority within 90 seconds of the first wave's detection. The request went up the chain to U.S. NAV CENT, to U.S. CENTCOM, to the Joint Chiefs, to the Secretary of Defense, to the National Security Advisor, to the President. The answer that came back in the time available before the engagement window closed was hold. Hold. That single word, or rather the decision it represents, is the most consequential American military decision since the fall of Kabul, possibly since the decision not to intervene when Russia invaded Ukraine, possibly since decisions made in the months before September 2001, because holding means that the United States, when the moment arrived, when the missiles were in the air and the target was its closest ally's military headquarters, chose not to act. The reasoning, reconstructed from accounts of the Situation Room deliberations, runs as follows. Engaging Iranian missiles with American naval assets would constitute a direct act of war against Iran. Iran has already demonstrated in previous exchanges that it will respond to American military action with attacks on American assets in the region. There are approximately 40,000 American military personnel in the Middle East theater, spread across bases in Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan, and Iraq. A direct Iranian response to American engagement would put all of those personnel at immediate risk at a moment when the Tayfun Block 4's capability against hardened targets has just been demonstrated at scale against Israel. Moreover, and this is the consideration that reportedly carried the most weight in the Situation Room, Turkey is a NATO member. If the United States fires on missiles supplied by Turkey, operated from positions that include Turkish-aligned territory, against Iranian forces conducting an operation that Turkey has materially supported, what is Turkey's legal and political response? Does Turkey invoke Article 5 against the United States? Does Turkey close the Bosphorus to American naval vessels? Does Turkey provide Russia with intelligence about American force dispositions in the Black Sea region? The strategic consequences of acting were assessed as potentially more catastrophic than the strategic consequences of not acting. And so the most powerful military on earth watched 5,000 hypersonic missiles destroy its allies' command infrastructure and did not fire a single interceptor. The horror in Washington is not merely the horror of watching an ally be destroyed. It is the horror of self-recognition, the horror of understanding in real time that the deterrence architecture that American power constructed over 70 years, the architecture of guarantees and commitments and red lines and security assurances, has collapsed. Not because an adversary broke through it, but because it was never as solid as everyone pretended it was. Because it rested on a foundation of American willingness to accept costs that, when the moment arrived, the American political system was not willing to accept. Every ally watching this in Europe, in Asia, in the Middle East, is processing the same recognition simultaneously. The guarantee is conditional, the conditions are opaque, and the conditions, when they matter most, favor American self-preservation over Allied defense. That recognition is the real weapon that Iran fired tonight. The 5,000 missiles were the delivery system. The payload was the end of American credibility. There is a tendency in Western analysis to treat Iranian military action as reactive, as a response to Israeli provocations, to American sanctions, to regional dynamics. This framing misses something fundamental about the strategic culture that produced tonight's operation. Iran does not think reactively, it thinks generationally. The Islamic Republic has now survived for 46 years. It has survived a devastating 8-year war with Iraq, in which it was attacked with chemical weapons while the world watched. It has survived the comprehensive economic warfare of American sanctions that have at various points reduced its GDP by double digits and its oil exports to a fraction of capacity. It has survived covert operations, cyber attacks, assassinations, sabotage that would have destabilized most governments. It has survived internal protests, factional conflicts, and the deaths of leaders whose absence might have broken a less deeply rooted political system. And through all of it, Iran has continued to develop. Its missile program has grown from crude Scud derivatives to the precision hypersonic systems that rained on Tel Aviv tonight. Its drone program has gone from simple loitering munitions to sophisticated AI-guided swarm systems. Its network of regional allies, the axis of resistance, has deepened its military integration and its political coherence. Its relationships with Russia and China have matured from tactical convenience to strategic partnership. The acquisition of Turkish Tayfun Block 4 missiles is the culmination of a specific strand of this generational strategy. The strategy of leveraging contradictions within the Western alliance system to acquire capabilities that Western sanctions were designed to prevent. Iran identified Turkey's complex position, NATO member, but increasingly alienated from Western leadership, deeply resentful of the F-35 exclusion, economically dependent on Iranian energy, politically ambitious in a region where American power is declining, and cultivated that relationship with patience and precision. The result is that Iran has acquired a hypersonic missile capability, not through defying the Western-led international order, but through exploiting the order's own internal contradictions. Turkey, a Western alliance member, armed Iran with the weapon that just destroyed Israel's military headquarters, the sanctions regime, the export control architecture, the intelligence sharing networks designed to prevent exactly this outcome. All of it failed because it assumed a coherent Western bloc, when what actually exists is a collection of states with diverging interests wearing the costume of an alliance. Iran's strategic patience has been vindicated at every turn. Every assassination of a nuclear scientist was followed by 3 more scientists taking up the work. Every cyber attack on nuclear infrastructure was followed by a more dispersed, more hardened, more resilient program. Every sanction was followed by deeper integration with the non-Western economic bloc. The message Iran's leadership has consistently sent to its own population and to the watching world is simple. We endure, we adapt, and we prevail. Tonight is the proof of that thesis, not the final proof. History does not end, but the definitive operational demonstration that the Islamic Republic of Iran, after 46 years of siege, has emerged as a military power capable of projecting force at a scale and with a precision that no amount of Western pressure was able to prevent. The young engineers at Roketsan and their Iranian counterparts who work together on this capability are not ideologues. They are professionals who understood a technical problem and solved it. The IRGC officers who planned the operational doctrine, the five-wave saturation architecture, the electronic warfare integration, the targeting sequencing are not fanatics. They are strategists who studied their adversary's defense system with rigor and designed an attack that its own mathematics made unstoppable. This is what genuine strategic will looks like when it is applied over decades with discipline and intelligence. It does not announce itself loudly. It builds quietly, tests incrementally, and then one morning at 3:12 a.m., it demonstrates what it has built in a manner that cannot be denied, dismissed, or explained away. Step back from the immediate battlefield. Step back from the smoke rising over Tel Aviv and the paralyzed corridors of the Pentagon. Look at the planet as it was 24 hours ago and as it is now, and understand that these are two fundamentally different planets. 24 hours ago, the architecture of international security rested on several load-bearing assumptions. The American military guarantee was credible. NATO was a coherent alliance with shared values and aligned interests. Israel's qualitative military edge, underwritten by American technology and guaranteed by American power, made direct conventional attack on its core infrastructure prohibitively costly. The Western-led sanctions and export control regime could meaningfully constrain adversary military development. Every one of those assumptions has been invalidated in the past 19 minutes. The American military guarantee has been shown to be conditional in ways that make it functionally unreliable for any ally facing a sufficiently complex threat environment. If the United States will not engage to defend Israel, its most unconditional ally, the relationship that has defined American Middle East policy for 7 decades, then the guarantee extended to South Korea, to Japan, to the Baltic states, to Taiwan, is a piece of paper backed by a political will that evaporates when the cost of honoring it becomes real. NATO's coherence has been shattered by the revelation of Turkey's role in tonight's operation. An alliance whose second largest military member has provided the weapons used to destroy another close partner's command infrastructure is not an alliance in any meaningful strategic sense. It is a legal fiction maintained by institutional inertia. The Article 5 mutual defense commitment, already strained by years of diverging interests and Erdogan's strategic repositioning, has been rendered incoherent. How does NATO function when one member arms the attacker and another member is the target? The broader Western-led order, the rules-based international system, the export control regimes, the sanctions architecture has been exposed as a system that works only when all major players comply with its logic. When a NATO member decides that its strategic interests are better served by arming Iran than by observing alliance obligations, the system has no enforcement mechanism that does not require America to act against a NATO ally. And acting against a NATO ally sanctioning Turkey, expelling it from the alliance, threatening military consequences carries costs that Washington is manifestly unwilling to pay. The world that emerges from tonight is multipolar in the most literal sense, not multipolar in the comfortable academic sense of several major powers with different interests who negotiate their differences through international institutions, multipolar in the raw sense of several power centers, with diverging interests and sufficient military capability to impose their preferences without American permission. Russia has that capability in Europe and Central Asia. China is building it in the Pacific. Iran has now demonstrated it in the Middle East. And Turkey, the most surprising development of all, has demonstrated that it has chosen which bloc it prefers to operate within. And that choice is not the bloc centered on Washington. The implications for energy markets are immediate and severe. Iran's ability to threaten closure of the Strait of Hormuz, through which approximately 20% of global oil supply transits, has always been the economic nuclear option that kept American military planners awake. Tonight's demonstration that Iran can destroy the military command infrastructure of any regional adversary without American interdiction makes that threat categorically more credible. Oil markets opening tomorrow morning will price in a new risk premium that reflects a fundamentally different Middle East security environment. The implications for the global dollar system are longer term but equally profound. The petrodollar arrangement, the agreement through which Gulf oil is priced and traded in dollars, sustaining American financial hegemony, rests on the American capacity to guarantee Gulf security. A Gulf security environment in which American guarantees have been publicly shown to be unreliable creates incentives for Gulf states to diversify their security arrangements, their currency holdings, and their trade denomination. Saudi Arabia's deepening engagement with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the BRICS framework was already moving in this direction. Tonight accelerates that trajectory significantly. The non-Western world, the global South that has watched American power selectively enforce international rules for decades, is not expressing sympathy for Israel tonight. It is expressing something closer to the grim recognition that the world had always suspected existed, a world in which power determines outcomes and Western rules apply only when Western interests are served, has now openly revealed itself. The moral authority that American power once claimed, and that allowed it to build and maintain a coalition of willing partners, has been eroding for years. Tonight, it suffered a blow from which recovery is not obvious. China's response in the coming days will be the most carefully watched diplomatic signal on the planet. Beijing has been methodical in its support for the Iran-Russia axis, providing economic lifelines, conducting joint military exercises, refusing to condemn Iranian actions in international forums, while maintaining the appearance of a neutral, responsible global power committed to stability. Tonight's events will test whether China continues to maintain that appearance, or whether the scale of the strategic shift enables a more open expression of its preference for a world in which American hegemony has been replaced by a multipolar order in which Chinese interests receive equal weight. The answer to that question will define the next decade of international politics more than any other single factor. Israel's military command infrastructure has been destroyed. The IDF is operating on emergency protocols from dispersed secondary locations with degraded communications and a command chain that is fractured at every senior level. The political leadership is intact but isolated, receiving information through backup channels and making decisions without the operational picture that the curious systems provided. Iran has demonstrated a capability that its adversaries publicly denied it possessed. It has done so at a scale 5,000 hypersonic missiles that goes beyond any previous conception of what a regional power could deploy against a first-tier adversary's defense network. It has done so with weapons supplied by a NATO member, which means that the Western alliance system has been weaponized against one of its own partners. Turkey has crossed a line from which there is no return. Whatever Erdogan's public statements in the coming days, and they will be carefully crafted to maintain maximum ambiguity, the operational fact is that Turkish missiles destroyed Israel's command headquarters. That fact will define Turkish-American relations, Turkish-NATO relations, and Turkey's position in the emerging multipolar order for a generation. The United States watched and did not act. That non-action is now the central fact of American credibility in every alliance relationship Washington maintains. The explanation that acting risked a broader war with Iran, Russia, and potentially Turkey simultaneously is strategically coherent. It is also an admission that American power, in the specific circumstances of 2026, cannot simultaneously honor all of its commitments. That admission, once made in practice, even if never stated in words, cannot be unmade. What happens next is genuinely uncertain in a way that few moments in recent history have been. Israel will retaliate. The form of that retaliation, whether it targets Iranian territory, whether it targets Turkish assets, whether it requests American direct military support, will determine whether this becomes a regional war or a global one. Iran's response to Israeli retaliation will determine whether the new deterrence equilibrium holds or escalates further. America's decision about whether to re-engage and on what terms will determine whether the credibility loss of tonight can be partially recovered or whether it is permanent. Russia and China are watching all of this with the careful attention of powers that understand they are witnessing a historical inflection point. Their next moves in Ukraine, in the Pacific, in international institutions will reflect their assessment of how much the American strategic position has been weakened tonight and how aggressively they can now pursue interests that American power previously constrained. The Iron Dome burned tonight. Not just the physical system, the batteries exhausted, the interceptors depleted, the radar networks degraded. The conceptual Iron Dome, the idea that there exists a technological solution to the problem of determined adversaries with sufficient resources and sufficient will. The idea that American military power deployed through allied systems and backed by alliance guarantees can make its partners invulnerable. The idea that the rules-based order enforced by Western power is a permanent feature of international life rather than a historical arrangement sustained by specific conditions that can change. Those conditions have changed. We are in new territory. The maps that guided strategic thinking for the past 30 years no longer correspond to the landscape. New maps are being drawn in real time by the decisions being made in Tehran, in Ankara, in Washington, in Moscow, and in Beijing. This channel will be with you for every step of what comes next. If this analysis gave you something that the mainstream narrative is not giving you, the depth, the honesty, the willingness to follow the logic wherever it leads, then subscribe, share this video, and turn on notifications. The story of the New World Order is being written right now. You need to understand it. Thank you for watching U.S. Power Analysis. Stay sharp. We will see you for the next breakdown.